This is fascinating. There's a piece in the Guardian. It was published day before yesterday by Damian Gale and Agencies on Saturday, December 10. And it starts out, U.S. intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia interfered in last month's presidential election to boost Donald Trump's bid for the White House, according to reports. They go on, separate report issued in the New York Times. Intelligence officers had a high confidence. Excuse me. Donald Trump's response to this is, these are the same people that said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Actually not. The CIA was not, to the best of my knowledge, was not where that originated. That originated with Dick Cheney and George W. Bush pushing it down. Remember how Cheney was basically living at the CIA, pushing through this intelligence and bringing in Curveball and bringing in Chalabi and all these other guys who were like, oh yeah, Saddam Hussein, he's, you know, the center of evil. See, it's one thing when you gin up a war with false information or even information that may have some truth to it, but you blow it all out of proportion. When you gin up a war with a country like Iraq, you know, our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have cost us, you know, in the neighborhood of around 6,000 or 7,000, I think, American lives, and probably 20 or 30,000 seriously injured Americans and a couple 100,000 traumatized Americans, and have killed somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million Iraqis, Afghans, and people in the region, and have led to a human diaspora and a disaster across the Middle East that has involved tens of millions of people and that is now destabilizing not only the Middle East, but Europe. That was all the result of George W. Bush's lies that led to the war in Iraq. But I don't think it was the CIA that was doing that. I think it was the Bush administration. And, you know, it's important to point that out. And the New York Times was cheerleading this thing, among others. I mean, MSNBC fired Phil Donahue because at the time he was questioning it. War is very profitable. But my point is, it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, hey, let's gin up a war on false pretenses against Vietnam, which we did. We, you know, Lyndon Johnson lied to us about the Gulf of Tonkin, and we ended up with a nice little war in Vietnam. And the whole thing was, you know, okay, you know, the Cultural Revolution has happened in China. China has turned into this communist country. They're aligned with the communist Soviet Union. Communism is an evangelical economic and political system. It is at risk of spreading to Cambodia, to Laos, to Vietnam, and it has already spread to North Vietnam with Ho Chi Minh. And as it spreads, we've got to stop it because, you know, as the dominoes fall, the next thing that falls could be the United States, and we could end up a communist country. That was the sales pitch back in the 70s, back in the 60s, actually. And so we went to war with Vietnam. And, you know, 50+ thousand American soldiers were killed. Roughly 2 million Vietnamese were killed. I don't believe we have accurate numbers for the hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions who were killed in Laos and Cambodia, you know, and just in Indochina in general. But those countries don't have nuclear weapons pointed at us. Russia and China do. Ronald Reagan wanted to have a little war to increase his political viability. You know, he started a war with Grenada. Right. You know, it's not... Margaret Thatcher wanted to have a little war to increase her popularity. By the way, in both cases, their popularities increased dramatically after their little wars. In fact, Thatcher did it first, you know, with the Falkland Islands. It was a gamble. It paid off because she was sinking. Her ratings were sinking so fast because, you know, she had busted the coal miners union. And she was promoting this neoliberal, hyper-conservative agenda across the UK. You know, let's privatize everything. And people were hating it. And then she had this war in the Falklands, and nothing pulls people together like a war. Nothing pulls people together like a common enemy. And I get that. We've done that, here in the United States. I mean, this goes way back, right? William Randolph Hearst, back in the early 1890s, was trying to promote, the Spanish-American War, what ultimately became the Spanish-American War. It spread from Cuba to the Philippines. And he said to Frederick Remington, "Get me the pictures, I'll give you the war." Now, I'm not a scholar of that period of time. I can't tell you if it was McKinley or the guy who preceded him who was like gung-ho for this. But basically, okay, so you have a war with Cuba and take it over. Or you have a war with the Philippines. That doesn't threaten the survival of human life on Earth. The nuclear winter is a real thing. Which is not to say that we shouldn't be truth-telling. We shouldn't be calling governments out on their behavior when they're misbehaving, even if they're nuclear-armed governments. We absolutely should. And frankly, we should be identifying our own failures. But you want to know who hacked this election? It was Chris Kobach with Interstate Crosscheck, in my humble opinion. Knocking people off the voting rolls in state after state, but particularly in the swing states. And Greg Palast has the evidence. He's here in Washington, D.C. today. He's going to be on our TV show tonight and on our radio show tomorrow. He's testifying. He's sharing this with members of Congress right now. I mean, that should be a story. But the media won't even touch that story. I mean, literally, the corporate media will not touch that story, although there's a bunch of Democrats who are asking them to, because it sounds partisan. So if you can't accuse the Republicans of hacking the election, let's accuse the Russians of it. Tell me how that happened. Oh, they revealed that the DNC had its thumb on the scale for Hillary. Big whoop. I mean, frankly, as a Democrat, and, I've been in this business for a while, I was not surprised by that. I was horrified by it. I thought, this is wrong, but I was not surprised by it. And I don't think most Americans were. Now, it might have diminished the potential enthusiasm for a Hillary candidacy that some Bernie supporters would have had, and turn them into cynics who didn't vote. And arguably, that could have been the way that it had impact on our election. But that raises the question, okay, if you're all upset that Russia released that information, would you be equally upset if the New York Times had released that information? Because shouldn't they have? Isn't that their job? If Donna Brazil and Debbie Wasserman Schultz are breaking the rules at the very least, if not breaking the law, and I think it was just breaking the rules, then don't we have a right to know about it? Which is not to say that it should be mediated by the Russians. I'm not suggesting that at all. So anyhow, and then meanwhile, the former United Kingdom ambassador to Uzbekistan, a fellow by the name of Craig Murray, who is, by the way, an associate of Julian Assange. So take this with a grain of salt. He said, I know who leaked the DNC emails. I've met the person who leaked them, and they are certainly not Russian. It's an insider. It's a leak, not a hack, and the two are different things. That's interesting. We'll be back.